Darren Blake, a dedicated single father, had just returned from the company's annual celebration when his supervisor, clearly intoxicated, needed someone to get her home safely. Without hesitation, he stepped up, drove her to her place, and made sure she was okay before leaving. But now, just one day later, he sat in front of her in the boardroom as she glared at him with a chilling tone. "You really thought I wouldn't find out?" Clara Jennings held up her phone, displaying a photo that told a misleading story. "A man like you, in my house, taking advantage of me while I was defenseless." Darren, 34, sat calmly behind the polished desk. A senior data consultant, known for his spotless performance and unwavering respect toward colleagues. He was raising his 8-year-old daughter on his own. Never had he imagined that a simple act of decency could spiral into a dangerous accusation. "Ms. Jennings, you were completely drunk. I just made sure you got home safely. That's all." Clara scoffed, her pale green eyes filled with cold amusement. "How convenient," she said. The polite employee steps in to help his drunk boss. And then, well, we all know what some people do when no one's watching. Her insinuation dripped with venom. Darren felt anger burning inside him, but didn't let it surface. Over the years, he had noticed her subtle bias, comments about how lucky he was to be part of such a prestigious team, the skeptical glances during meetings, the way she scrutinized his work while waving through subpar reports from others. He took a breath. "I think you're misunderstanding what happened," he replied steadily. "There was no violation, just an effort to protect your dignity." She leaned forward, voice sharp as glass. "I could file a report, say it was harassment. It's your word against mine. Who do you think they'll believe?" The tension in the room thickened. Darren met her stare, noticing how much she relished the control. She had no idea he had documented everything from the moment he found her sobbing in the hallway to the second he closed her front door. "Have you ever experienced something like this?" He paused. "If yes, let us know in the comments. And tell us where you're watching from." He had the footage, the time-stamped audio, even the rideshare tracking. "What if I told you I have evidence proving nothing inappropriate occurred?" he said, his voice quiet but firm. Clara laughed. "Evidence? What kind of proof could someone like you possibly have?" But Darren smiled. It was the smile of someone who had been underestimated one too many times. Who knew this moment would come? Because people like Clara always overplay their hand when they think no one is watching. Asterisk. While Clara kept listing consequences and demanding a resignation, Darren's thoughts drifted to his daughter, Nyla, waiting for him at home. He thought of the daily injustice she would one day face, and of the plan he had crafted long before this confrontation even began. If stories like this, where bias hides behind a mask of power, feel familiar to you, consider subscribing to the channel. Because what Clara didn't realize was that Darren had spent years quietly gathering evidence. Every offhand remark, every dismissive glance, every subtle humiliation. And now, he finally had the spark to reveal the truth about the firm's most celebrated executive by Monday morning. Clara had already begun spinning her tail when Darren walked into the office. He was greeted with side eyes, awkward silences, and a chill in the air that hadn't been there on Friday. She had planted seeds of doubt with surgical precision. "Darren, "We need to talk," said Lila from HR, appearing beside his desk before. He could even power up his screen. "There's been a formal complaint filed against you." As he walked the hallway, his colleagues avoided eye contact, as if guilt was something contagious. Clara had been clever, never accusing directly, but implying just enough to stain his name permanently. In the HR conference room, she sat confidently, between two company lawyers, like a monarch ready for trial. Her smile was cold, smug, certain of the outcome. "Mr. Blake," Lila began, "Ms. Jennings claims you acted inappropriately after escorting her home from the event. She also submitted photographic evidence." "What kind of photos?" Darren asked, keeping his voice steady. Clara slid her phone forward. It showed her in bed, slightly messy hair, expression unreadable. "You left me in a vulnerable state, Darren," she said. "Alone with a man, while I wasn't fully aware of myself." Darren looked at the image, expression unreadable. "Interesting," he replied. "And who took this photo?" "I did, when I realized what you'd done." That was all he needed. First documented lie. Clara had no idea that Darren had grown up navigating survival since he was 12. After his mother's death, the foster system had taught him to rely on no one, to prepare for the worst, to collect receipts. Later, 4 years in the military had sharpened his instincts, strategy, patience, and the value of knowing your opponent before making a move. Now, raising Nyla on his own, he had built a life of preparation, a mental playbook for situations just like this, especially in a world where black men were often the first to be blamed and the last to be heard. "Mr. Blake," Lila continued, "do you understand the gravity of this claim? You may be placed on unpaid leave while we conduct a full review." Darren said nothing, but inside, his next move was already in motion. "Asterisk, of course," Darren replied, his voice steady. "And I suppose Ms. Jennings' version is automatically more credible than mine?" Clara leaned in, her eyes gleaming with cold satisfaction. "Darren, you've always been a solid worker." "Truly. But sometimes men like you lose sight of boundaries when they find themselves around successful women. It's not your fault, really. It happens." The patronizing tone hit like a slap. Darren had heard it before, in the voice of child welfare agents when they talked about kids like him. In the cautious tone of military superiors who doubted his leadership. In the raised eyebrows of professors, surprised that he topped their class. He repeated her words softly, almost like an echo. "Right. Single father. Comes from a modest background. Working here out of the company's generosity. Lines get blurry when the status gap is too wide." The room went still. Leela from HR shifted uncomfortably in her seat. The attorneys remained motionless, but Clara, she savored every second, believing she was in full control. Darren thought of Nyla. That morning, she had looked up at him and asked, "Daddy, why do you look worried? You always say good people win." He had smiled, promised her that they do, and that sometimes good people just have to work a little harder to prove it. "Ms. Jennings," he said at last, "I'd like to ask you something. During the party, you made a comment about your former assistant, Samantha Cho. You said she played the race card after being let go." Clara tensed, barely perceptibly. "That has nothing to do with this conversation." "I think it might," Darren replied, "because Samantha approached me last week. She's suing the company for racial bias. And apparently, she has some very revealing recordings of conversations she had with you. Clara's face paled, if only for a second. She's just bitter, she snapped, making up lies. Nobody will believe her. Darren smiled. That same quiet, knowing smile. Built over years of restraint, strategy, and experience. You could be right, Ms. Jennings. After all, who would take the word of an Asian woman against a well-respected white executive? The irony landed hard. Clara's mouth twitched. She'd just walked into her own trap. What exactly are you suggesting? Lila asked. Darren stood slowly, smoothly. I'm not suggesting anything. I'm just pointing out how easily some people believe their voices hold more weight than others, based on factors that should have no place in a professional environment. As he walked out, he could hear Clara hissing angrily at the lawyers. Beside her, she had no idea that Darren had been collecting evidence for years. Every comment, every snide remark, every decision she thought was too subtle to trace, and every word she had just spoken was now safely recorded by the discreet voice. App on the phone in his jacket pocket. Every subtle display of arrogance had been documented. Each veiled hint of prejudice was now stored, backed up, and ready to be unleashed. But what Clara Jennings failed to see was that Darren Blake wasn't just some mid-level employee. He held a master's degree in data systems, and over the years he had built a powerful circle: investigative reporters, civil rights attorneys, and corporate watchdogs who lived to bring down people like her. But above all else, Clara made one fatal mistake. She threatened the one thing Darren held above everything, his daughter. And when you threaten the only family of a man who's already lost everything once, you don't just face resistance, you awaken a storm. One you cannot silence, intimidate, or stop. That same afternoon, while Clara sipped champagne and gloated with her legal team, Darren was at home, helping Nyla solve her math problems, quietly preparing his next move in a game she never realized. She had already lost Dot by Tuesday. Clara pushed for a formal suspension. Without pay Dot by Wednesday, a confidential memo circulated among leadership, urging them to watch for certain behaviors among staff Dot by Thursday. Darren received official notice banning him from the premises until further review. But Darren hadn't spent those 3 days sulking. He had spent them activating phase 1 of a plan he'd been crafting for months. His first phone call wasn't to a random labor attorney. He called Amanda Ruiz, a specialist in racial discrimination cases, known for dismantling boardrooms and exposing systemic bias with surgical precision. Mr. Blake? Her voice held interest. Samantha Cho told me about you. She said you might have something worth hearing. I have more than just stories, Ms. Ruiz, Darren replied. I have proof. In her office, he opened his laptop and showed her the file's spreadsheets detailing performance reviews, where Black and Latino employees consistently received lower scores, were passed over for promotions, and had their work double-checked, while white colleagues with weaker performance were praised and elevated. Amanda leaned in. Very thorough. How long have you been building this? 2.5 years. Since I first saw the pattern. He clicked into another folder. But this is where things get serious. Amanda raised her eyebrows, then smiled slowly. On screen appeared screenshots of private executive group chats, emails laced with coded language, and worst of all, a 23-minute audio recording from a boardroom meeting where Clara and others discussed how to appear diverse. Without lowering the bar, Amanda exhaled slowly. "Well, Darren, I think it's time the world saw what really goes on behind those glass walls. Asterisk, how did you get access to all this?" Amanda asked, visibly intrigued. Darren smiled. "For the first time in days. Well, let's just say 5 years working in IT before I became a data analyst taught me a few tricks. And when you're constantly excluded from meetings that affect your future, you find other ways to stay in the loop." Meanwhile, back in her office, Clara Jennings was on a high dot. She made a round of congratulatory calls to other senior women in leadership, boasting about how she had nipped a potential problem in the bud. She had no clue that every smug word was being logged by the monitoring system Darren had quietly set up months earlier. The issue with men like him, Clara said over the phone to Margaret Lane, a regional branch executive, is that they don't know their place. They think they're owed the same level of treatment as people who've actually earned their spot. On the other end, Margaret chuckled. "Well, at least you acted before he tried the race angle. Those cases are a nightmare. They drag on. For years. Exactly. That's why I moved quickly. A single black man versus a respected white woman? Sure, the courts pretend to care more now. But let's be honest, credibility still wins the day." Darren sat at home, listening. Every sentence automatically transcribed, time-stamped, saved. Clara was digging her own grave and didn't even know she was holding the shovel. That afternoon, Amanda called, "Darren, I just got something big. The Justice Department is investigating discriminatory practices at major corporations. Your company is on their radar. That means your evidence won't just help us with your individual case. It could tip a much larger federal investigation." As Amanda spoke, Darren looked toward the kitchen, where Nyla sat at the table, solving equations with quiet focus. Earlier that day, she had asked why he was home in the middle of the week. Said he was working things out at the office. "Will everything be okay, Daddy?" she asked, her eyes full of the kind of wisdom kids aren't supposed to have. "Yes, sweetheart," he had answered gently. "Sometimes people think they can mistreat others without consequences, but the truth always finds a way out." She had smiled, nodded, and gone back to her homework. That smile, that trust was all the fuel Darren needed. This wasn't just about him. It was about creating a world where Nyla would never have to shrink herself to feel safe, or be treated like she was less. "Amanda," he said, returning to the call, "there's one more thing I haven't shared yet." "What's that?" "The full recording of my meeting with Clara yesterday, not her speech. The part about men, like me not knowing their place. The part where she said the quiet part out loud. Asterisk, it's all there," Darren said calmly. "Even the part where she admits she set this whole thing up." Amanda fell silent. "Darren, do you understand what this means? This isn't just discrimination anymore. She orchestrated a calculated effort to destroy your career based entirely on race, and she was reckless enough to say it out loud." "On tape." "Exactly," Darren nodded. "And that takes this from a workplace complaint to a potential federal crime." That night, as Darren helped Nyla with her school project on the civil rights movement, she paused, looked up at him, and asked, "Dad, why do some people think they're better just because of someone's skin color?" He paused, his throat tightening. Sometimes, sweetheart, people who've never had to struggle believe that life is easy because they're special. But they forget we're all equal. Always have been. And what do we do when someone thinks we're less? Darren smiled. He thought of Clara, laughing at her own cruelty, completely unaware that her fall had already begun. We prove them wrong with facts, with calm, and by never stepping out of our integrity. What Clara didn't realize was that Darren had spent years building a web of allies, journalists, activists, and insiders from other corporations who had experienced the same silent battles. His suspension gave him time, precious time to activate everything he had carefully prepared. On Friday, while Clara and Margaret Lang clinked wine glasses at the city's priciest bistro, celebrating what they believed was flawless HR management, Darren was in a secure video call with officials from the Department of Justice. He laid out the timeline, the evidence, the culture of silent oppression. When the call ended, he closed his laptop and allowed himself a smile, not of vengeance, but of justice. The kind of smile that comes from years of restraint, observation, and waiting for the right moment to let the truth speak for itself. Because Darren had learned something most people never understand, that patience and documentation will always outlast arrogance, and that sometimes you don't need to fight those who want to bring you down. You just need to let them talk long enough to hang themselves. Monday started like any other for Clara Jennings. Luxury espresso. Executive roundtable at 9 o'clock. Lunch with investors booked at noon. She was reviewing quarterly slides when Layla from HR knocked on her door with an expression Clara had never seen before. A mix of disbelief and pure dread. "Clara, we have a serious problem." Clara rolled her eyes. "Don't tell me Darren hired some bargain lawyer trying to stir up nonsense." Lila walked in, closed the door. "The FBI is here. They want to speak with you about ongoing discriminatory practices within the company." Clara froze. "What are you saying?" "There's a federal investigation underway. Someone has submitted a full report, recordings, emails, HR data manipulation. And it's credible." Leela paused, watching the color drain from Clara's face. "And his name is at the center of it all." At that moment, the door opened. 2 federal agents stepped inside, followed by the company's CEO, Mr. Andrews, his face drawn, as if he had aged a decade overnight. "Miss Jennings," the lead agent said, flashing a badge. "I'm special. Agent Carter, Department of Justice. We'd like to ask you a few questions about your management practices." Clara tried to steady herself, but her hands trembled. "Of course, though I don't quite understand what this is about." Without a word, Agent Carter tapped his tablet. The room filled with her own voice. "The thing with people like him is they don't understand boundaries. They think they deserve the same treatment as those who've actually built something." The blood drained from Clara's face. That was out of context. "I was referring to," another clip began to play, "a single black man versus a respected white woman. Courts might pretend to be fairer now, but credibility still matters." Mr. Andrews slammed his hand on the table. "Clara, please tell me you didn't say that." But the worst wasn't over. The agent pulled out a folder and slid it across the table. "These are transcripts of your phone calls from the last 6 months, all lawfully obtained through a court order. following a formal complaint of systemic discrimination. Clara flicked through the pages. Each line hit like a hammer. Every derogatory remark, every racist judgment, every choice made to keep certain people down, all dated, sourced, and annotated. Who gave you this? She STAMMERED double quotes Mr. Darren Blake. The agent replied, along with evidence that you deliberately fabricated a claim against him based entirely on race. He showed her more. Building security records. Footage proving that Clara had taken the compromising photo 3 hours after. Darren had already left her apartment. The truth crashed over her like a tidal wave. Darren had documented everything, not every step, every word. Every second of that evening, the cameras in her building confirmed the timestamp on the photos. And furthermore, the agent continued, we have logs showing unauthorized access to the HR system. You manually altered evaluations of Black and Latino staff, lowering performance scores to block their career advancement. Mr. Andrews stood, his voice shaking with fury. You've risked everything, Clara. Government partnerships, our public image, years of work gone. You've destroyed this company's integrity. I can explain, Clara tried to say. There is no explanation, he interrupted. Then he turned to the agents. She's terminated. Effective immediately. We'll cooperate fully with your investigation.